to David. You see, David had walked through this valley many times. As a matter of fact, around 1000 BC, he marched through it when he took the Jebusite stronghold known as Urushalim, which overlooked this valley. Now, in Ugaritic, Uru means a foundation that is laid. Ur means city. So Uru is foundation of a city. Ur of the Chaldees means the city of the Chaldeans. Shalim is the Ugaritic word for evening star. Now, that would be Venus. Venus would also be the morning star, which would be Shahar in this language. But this concept of the evening star, what does it mean if the sun is going down, the light is fleeting from the sky over the horizon, and you see this star? Well, it means that the day is ending. The day is drawing to a close. And if you're seeing that evening star, that Shalim, then you've survived another day. You've made it through another day. So it has connected to it this idea of completeness, or peace, or wholeness. So this was the foundation of wholeness or completeness. Now, 400 years earlier than David taking the city, Joshua had marched through this valley as well. He attacked those in this valley. And he tried to take the city overlooking it. That was around 1400 BC. But he could not take the city. Though he did kill the king of the Jebusites, Adonizedek, killed him in battle. Does that name sound familiar? Adonizedek? No? How about if we break it into its parts? Adonai. What does Adonai mean? Lord. What does Zedek mean? Righteousness. The Lord of righteousness. That was this Jebusite king's name. So the king of Urushalim was named Lord of righteousness. Do you know who Adonizedek's predecessor was? Anybody have an idea? His name sounds very familiar. Melchizedek. You heard of Melchizedek? His name means king of righteousness. Remember Abraham paid the tithe to him? Melchizedek lived 600 years before Adonizedek. Both of them worshipped El Elyon. Both of them worshipped Yahweh, Jehovah God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Adonizedek also worshipped the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So, what's up with that? If they worship the same God, why was God having Joshua, then Saul, then David attack this people and do battle to drive them out? It doesn't make sense. Not until we learn about that valley. That valley that was overshadowed by death. That valley where evil dwelt. It was known as the Valley of Hinnom. Or more properly, literally the valley of the son of Hinnom. The Hebrew word for valley is Geh. So the term valley of Hinnom in Hebrew is Geh Hinnom. I know you've heard that word before. It's transliterated in our English Bibles as Gehenna. And Jesus refers to it as a place of eternal or complete punishment. But why? These people worshipped Jehovah. So why was the valley of Hinnom known as the valley overshadowed by death, or the valley of slaughter, as Jeremiah called it? Why was it a seat of evil? Well, to begin with, Hinnom is a Jebusite name. Its meaning is obscure. It sounds like a form of the Hebrew word for moaning or muffled groaning. After the seasonal rains, the valley was green and lush. The Jebusites who dwelt in the city of Urushalim would use it as sort of a park or a center for social activities, including religious ones. They worshiped the one true God. But at some point in time, they began to worship other gods as well. Nothing really extreme at first, at least not during the reign of Melchizedek. But during those 600 years between Melchizedek and Adonizedek, they gradually began to worship other gods, along with Yahweh. At first, there were fertility gods. And they had festivals with dancing and singing, and there were feasts, there was food and drinks. And then all of a sudden, they started having theater, drama. There were lewd enactments. Over the decades, they added ritual prostitution. After centuries, there was homosexual prostitution. There even came to be rituals where priestess were having sex with animals. Yeah, if you wanted your animals on your farm to be productive, you could go and pay for a priestess to perform her priestly duties, and that would ensure that your animal was going to be productive. Even still, God was patient with these people. God, prophetically revealing the future to Abraham, said that Abraham could not yet inhabit the land because their cup of iniquity was not yet full. Do you remember that passage? Yeah, Abraham, I promise you I'm going to give you this land, but not yet, because the people who live there, their cup of iniquity is not yet full. But that day came when the cup was full. The Jebusites were an ancient Canaanite tribe, mentioned frequently in the Old Testament. According to the Biblical Table of Nations, in Genesis 10, the Jebusites descended from Canaan, who was a son of Ham, one of Noah's 3 sons. This places them among the broader group of Canaanite peoples. They're listed among other groups like the Hittites, the Amorites, the Girgashites, and others as one of the nations whose territory God promised to Abraham's descendants. So what filled that cup, you might ask? If worshiping other gods, if ritual prostitution, ritual homosexuality, if that had not filled the cup, what filled the cup?
Child sacrifice.
And we look at Exodus for that answer. God told Abraham he would give the land to his descendants when the cup was full. If you remember, the Egyptians began sacrificing Israelite children to their river gods. and God sent Moses to deliver them. About the same time, the Canaanites began sacrificing children to Molech. And that is when God sent Israel to drive them out of the land in the Israelite conquest. It's interesting to note that when Jesus was born, Herod also murdered thousands of children as well. It is just a sign of ultimate evil to harm children. When the Israelites failed to completely remove the Baal worshippers from the land, they too were enticed by this evil to sacrifice their own children to Baal and Molech. As a result of doing these detestable things, God used the Assyrians and the Babylonians to remove the Israelites too. No nation in history that has slaughtered its children has escaped God's wrath. We read in Joshua that the Jebusites in the valley of Hinnom built Tophets and sacrificed their children to Molech in them. Topheth is a word that means incinerator. I want you to think about this. So they built incinerators and burned their children in them. Now, some of these incinerators were more elaborate than others. Some were just fire pits on platforms in front of statues of Baal. Might need you to go to the next one, Jerry. There we go. Some were just simple fire pits in front of a statue of Baal, where they would burn their children. Some were elaborate and had outstretched bronze hands with fire burning under them. And the priest would toss the children into those burning hands. Not working, Jerry. Go to the next one. This was a horrible, horrible thing. Historians tell us that the priest would beat drums loudly to muffle the groans of the children being burned alive. Hinnom, muffled groaning. This was done on an unimaginable scale. Some of these tophets have been found with the burned bones of up to 20,000 children at a single site. And these sites were built all over the land of Canaan. During Joshua's conquest, the Jebusites lived in the hill country, the mountains near Urushalim. They were part of a coalition against the invading Israelites under Joshua. For example, their king, we've already talked about him, Adonizedek, led a group of Amorite kings in a failed attack on Gibeon. You read about it in Joshua 10. It resulted in his defeat and death. Despite these losses, the Israelites, specifically the tribe of Judah, could not fully drive them out of Jerusalem. The city remained a Jebusite stronghold through the period of the Judges, with Israelites sometime living alongside them and even intermarrying them, as we read in Judges chapter 3, which brought its own divine judgment. The Jebusites' political control ended when King David captured the fortified city of Jebus around 1000 BC. David took the citadel and renamed it the stronghold of Zion. He then made it his capital, renaming the city of David and changing the name to Jerusalem. Interestingly, David later dealt peacefully with at least one Jebusite, Araunah. from whom he purchased the threshing floor on Mount Moriah to build an altar, and later the site of Solomon's temple. Remaining Jebusites appear to have been subjugated rather than exterminated. They integrated into Israelite society to some extent, serving in forced labor under Solomon. They built the temple. But their demon worship continued, and they influenced the Israelites to burn their children in incinerator idols too. The Bible even tells us that Solomon himself set back up incinerator idols in the valley of Hinnom, right outside the southwest corner of Jerusalem. And built rooms, Solomon built rooms inside of the temple for male prostitutes. The Israelites continued worshiping Baal and burning their children in Molech incinerators. This is why Jeremiah said the valley would later be called the Valley of Slaughter, or the Valley of Death. Because when the Babylonians sacked Jerusalem, the people would be slaughtered in the very valley where they had burned their children to Molech. King Josiah, remember him? Bible says he turned his heart to God like no man before him. He desecrated the site to end these rituals. And by the intertestamental period and Jesus' time, this valley had become a municipal garbage dump where Jerusalem's refuse, animal carcasses that were rotting, and even executed criminals' bodies were burned. Pots of human excrement were emptied there. You know what a chamber pot is? They were taken to the southwestern wall and dumped in the valley of Hinnom. This was to keep the valley of Hinnom from being used again for idol worship and for child sacrifice. The constant fire smoldered there to consume the waste, producing smoke, foul odors, and maggots. Flies and maggots. Making it a symbol of uncleanness, destruction, and divine curse. In Jewish apocalyptic literature, namely the Book of Enoch, Gehenna evolved into an eschatological concept, a place of fiery judgment for the wicked after death. The backdrop made it a potent image for Jesus to invoke. To the Pharisees, whom Jesus accused of hypocrisy, he said, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you travel across the sea and land to make a single proselyte. And when he becomes a proselyte, you make him twice as much a child of..."
Hell.
It does not say hell.
Gehenna.
Gehenna. You make him twice as much a son of the valley of Hinnom. Gehinnom. Twice as much a son of Gehinnom as yourselves. That was pretty offensive. And later he says, "You serpents, you brood of vipers, how are you to escape being sentenced to Gehenna?" Here, Gehenna represents the fate awaiting those who lead others astray, those who exhibit false piety. In Mark 9, he adds, "It's better for you to enter in the kingdom of heaven with one eye than with two eyes and be thrown into," our versions say hell, the Greek says Gehenna, the valley of Hinnom, the trashy, the burning trashy, where the worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. Now, that doesn't mean that the maggots had eternal life. Doesn't mean that the fire wasn't going to go out someday. What it means is that the maggots did not stop eating. It's like saying the maggots are always there, where there's always fire and always maggots on the trash heap in the valley of groaning. The maggots ate and ate and ate, and they consumed everything. And when only bones were left, you know what they did? They piled them up with dry dung and burned them until they were totally consumed. Jerry, gonna give you a hand with the next one?
And that's where we get our term bonfire.
So this is what the valley of Jerome looks like. All the time, every day, all day long, day and night. The fire never stopped consuming bones. The maggots never stopped eating rotting flesh. The valley overshadowed by death. So the undying worm and the unquenchable fire evoked the valley's maggots and perpetual burning trash. Symbolizes complete, irreversible destruction. The evil that dwelt in that valley infected, overcame, and consumed many. The only protection from that evil was to be close to God. David recognized this and wrote the following line. After, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, because thou art with me. It's interesting that he doesn't write, I have no fear of death, I'm a big man. Instead he says, I will fear no evil. Just as Jesus taught his disciples to pray, lead me not into temptation, into that dark valley, but rather deliver me from the evil one. David didn't say, I'm not afraid because I'm strong. David didn't say, I'm not afraid because I'm courageous. He didn't say, I'm not afraid because I'm better equipped. He said, I'm not afraid because the shepherd is with me. David knew what it meant for sheep to have a shepherd. It meant they need not fear. David uses that imagery and his own experience as a shepherd to relate this important reason not to fear. The shepherd carries a rod and a staff. Those aren't the same thing. A staff was used to prod a sheep in the right direction. It had a crook or a hook on one end that was used to pull a sheep back to safety. And David could see God doing this in his own life. And as long as he accepted God's correction, he knew he could not go astray. Now, David didn't fear the lion either. The lion, the scripture tells us, is always on the prowl, seeking an errant sheep to devour, just as those who allowed themselves to stray far from God in that valley of evil were all ultimately slaughtered and devoured. David said he didn't fear the lion because he knew the shepherd carried a rod. And the rod and the staff are not the same thing. The staff is for gentle correction of the sheep. The rod, well, the rod is used to kill lions. Before David met Goliath in battle, he told Saul, a lion took one of my sheep, and I chased it down and rescued my sheep from its jaws. Then I struck the lion, and I killed it. And I will do the same to this evil Philistine. David knew the power of the shepherd's rod. He had wielded it. And here David says that just as he had used the rod to kill the physical lion, our shepherd carries a rod to destroy that spiritual lion who seeks to devour us. Our shepherd's rod is for killing lions. Therefore we fear no evil. Just as Paul tells us, the Lord is with us always. And there's no evil power that can separate us from the shepherd's love. No evil is going to possess you if the Lord is with you. We don't walk through places of evil without fear because we're courageous. We have no fear because the shepherd is with us. Nothing evil can separate him from us. And he has a mighty weapon in his hand. We take heart in our shepherd's staff that corrects us, and in his rod that protects us. One last video, Jerry. Questions? Comments? Yes, sir.
After your lesson, errantly so. But I've gone through a couple of years of pretty tough stuff. And after being treated and cured from cancer, I fell down my stairs and had a lot of injuries and broken bones. And I picked up this scripture, again, sounds like errantly so, that even though I walked through the valley of the shadow of death, I had not succumbed to death because God was with me with all his power. And when I went in the hospital and they put me in intensive care, 2 doctors said, "We want to talk to you." So I went in their office, and I was still in intensive care then. And they said, "We wanted to tell you that in our patients, anybody with a like circumstance of you," which is, I would have been 86 at that time, and I had been a diabetic for 46 years, they said, both of them said their patients would be dead at the bottom of the stairs. So I have prayed and shared with others that I've been through this valley of the shadow of death, and I guess I can't call it victory, but I had not succumbed. So even though it's different from what you're saying, I got a great deal of comfort that I had survived that because of God's healing hand on me.
I would not say errantly so, and I'll tell you why. If we go back and we look at what tempted these people to turn to other gods, it was problems in their life. It was crop failure. It was animals that did not reproduce the way they thought they should. Whenever life didn't go the way they thought it should, they looked for other alternatives. They tried to fix it themselves instead of turning to the one true God. And this is the way the enemy works. He attacks us, he eats at us, he gives us problems in life, just like he did Job, hoping that we will turn from Jehovah God. But we always have that shepherd's crook pulling us back, giving us comfort. We always have that shepherd's rod keeping the lion at bay. So I would not say errantly so. I would say that is how it works today. That's really how it worked for the Jebusites. They were seeking relief, but they sought it from other gods.
I'm surprised that rod doesn't have a point on it to attack that lion.
Well, the shepherd's rod was a club. It was not a spear. It was a club. And if you read what David told Saul, he said, I grabbed that lion by the beard and I struck it and killed it. So yes, the shepherd's rod was a club.
So, not really a fair question from your lesson, but you seem pretty adept at solving things like this. But it's interesting to me that Christ is both referred to as a lamb and a lion, and then we're told that Satan is like a raging lion.
And he comes dressed as a lamb.
Yeah. So it's interesting, at least if nothing else, it shows that God likes this imagery and shows the juxtaposition between them. But it's interesting that Christ has both personas, if you will.
And the very priest who were the priest of Jehovah were the ones telling the people, well, you know, we got this drought, maybe we should sacrifice something to the rain god. This is the correlation that Jesus was making to the Pharisees.
Do you think that they were actively teaching that people should go take part of that, or the way they were making God so unapproachable through their money exchanging and other things, they were driving them to some other source? I mean, obviously, we don't know.
That's obviously part of it, yeah. They were blocking the way to God. If you remember Ahaz and Jezebel, they were in the same cult. As a matter of fact, Jezebel means, where is Baal? She was the priestess, the Syrophoenician priestess. She officiated in these rituals, and they would not let people approach Jehovah. They wanted them to worship Baal. There's so much imagery. So much imagery.
Your points about Melchizedek, and what was the other guy's name?
What was that?
Melchizedek, and what was the other guy's name?
Adonizedek.
That's interesting. I never heard that before. I've always wondered about in a manner of Melchizedek being a high priest.
There's so much here. There were two hills. The hill of Zion, that the city of Zion is built on, Jerusalem, the foundation of peace. And there was the Mount Moriah that was beside it. If you remember, Mount Moriah is where Abraham went to sacrifice Isaac.
And that's where the temple ends up being later?
They thought that they were building the temple in the same spot. I don't think they did. I think the temple is outside of, I think the spot of that sacrifice is outside of the wall. As a matter of fact, I think it's a place we know as Golgotha. What was the faith of Abraham? Why is Abraham sacrificing his son, burning his son? Why are we told that that was him exhibiting his faith? Faith in what? What did God promise Abraham?
Children and offspring, right?
He promised Abraham that his offspring would come through Isaac. Abraham's an old man, and he only has this one child that this promise is going to come through, and he's told to go and sacrifice him. Abraham had faith in God's promise, which means that Abraham believed what? That after the sacrifice, God would raise his son back up to life so that he could fulfill his promise. Jesus was raised back up so that he could spiritually father the children of Abraham, the true children of Abraham. And another thing we miss is that Isaac was probably around 30 years old when his old man dad took him up that mountain. You guys have seen what a burnt sacrifice is. You know how much wood it takes for a burnt sacrifice? And the Bible tells us that Abraham bound up all the wood, and put it on Isaac's shoulders. That was no little boy. This was a man capable of carrying on his back up a mountain. I don't know if you ever carried anything up a mountain, but carrying this wood enough for a Holocaust sacrifice on his back up a mountain. This was a grown man. It also means that Isaac's dad was old. He could have beat the crap out of Abraham if he wanted to, which means that Isaac was willing. There's just so much here. So much here. Julie's giving me the 3-minute mark.
Desperate times calls for desperate measures. We can sometimes ridicule these people like, we haven't had rain. We haven't had rain. So I'm going to try this. You know, and things, you know.
My farm's going to be ruined. I'm going to lose everything.
But you know, I've seen that today, especially in situations where Clint's best friend came down with Lou Gehrig's disease, and they were desperate. They went everywhere, even to a lady that said the problem is with Travis's parents, don't have anything to do with them, and they didn't. And I've known, you know, people dying of cancer going to like faith healers and things like that. And so before I get real critical of people, you know, you know, it's sort of reality sometimes that, man, I've got to try something. This isn't working. You know?
It happens every day. Every day. But let's keep one thing in mind. Their cup to remove them was not full when they started appealing to other gods. It wasn't full when they started this lewd and crude worship. It wasn't full, their cup of iniquity, until they started sacrificing their children to false gods.
And we have about 1 million abortions a year in our country. The last data point we have shows a 10% increase over the year before. We haven't slowed down at all.
Read the reasons. Listen to the reasons. It was going to ruin my career. I couldn't finish college. I would have lost my job. I would have had to drop out. I couldn't handle it financially. It was a burden for my parents. Many of the same reasons.